One little girl sat frozen on a park bench, her arms wrapped around a stuffed bear, her eyes wide with a silence too old for 5 years. The storm had chased everyone indoors except one man and his dog. Officer Jack Carter didn't expect to find a miracle that night, but Rocky did. Through the snow and silence, the German shepherd froze mid-stride, ears up, heart steady. And what they found beside that bench wasn't just a child. It was a second chance wrapped in frost and faith. This is the story of how a loyal dog, a grieving officer, and a little girl with a stuffed bear reminded a sleeping town that love still shows up even in the coldest hour. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. These are the stories that stay with you long after the snow melts. The storm had a way of silencing the town, not by muting sound, but by swallowing it whole. Wind coiled through empty streets like smoked snow, falling in slow spirals that blurred all edges. At this hour, even the traffic lights blinked to no one. Windows were dark, porches buried. And yet somewhere behind that frozen stillness, something was not right. Officer Jack Carter drove through the blizzard with the kind of calm that came from habit, not peace. 35 years old, with a jawline more clenched than carved, Jack wore his police uniform like armor creased clean and personal. His frame was wiry and tall, wrapped tight in a department-issued jacket and a grief he never took off. His daughter Lily had died 5 winters ago. 5 years since she vanished into a whiteout, less than 2 miles from their home. 5 years of pretending he was still a whole person. He didn't believe in signs. He didn't believe in much. But tonight the air held a weight he hadn't felt in years. Beside him sat Rocky, his K9 partner, German shepherd, 4 years old, black and rust coat, thick against the cold. Rocky was trained disciplined, but he was more than that. He was instinct wrapped in fur with eyes too old and too knowing for a dog his age. A faint silver line cut across his ear, a healed scar from a warehouse fire the year before. He rarely barked, he never rushed. And when he moved, it was with the steady focus of something ancient. The cruiser's radio came to life in a burst of static. Unit 17. Do you read? Jack lifted the mic. This is 17, go ahead. Received a call from a pedestrian near Northridge Park. They believed they saw a child alone, sitting on a bench. Snow's heavy. Visibility's poor. Caller couldn't confirm. Jack's brow tightened. Any details? Age, clothing, negative. Caller left the scene too cold. Just said it didn't look right. Jack responded with a simple copy and killed the mic. For a moment he didn't move. His knuckles whitened on the wheel. Then, without a word, he turned onto the road that led toward the park. Rocky stirred, rising slightly in his seat. The dog sensed things Jack didn't have words for. The tires hissed against the ice-packed street as the cruiser crept through the intersection. The park wasn't far, just past the church across from a shuttered playground. Jack's breath fogged against the inside of the windshield. He thought of Lily, not in the way grief sometimes ambushes, but in a quiet, inevitable way, like a photograph your mind keeps hanging, no matter how many times you try to take it down. Snow piled higher as he reached the gates of Northridge Park, the wrought iron barely visible under wind-blown drifts. Jack parked along the curb and shut off the engine. In the stillness, he could hear the wind moaning through the trees. He opened the door. The cold hit like a slap. Come, he said not loudly. Rocky leapt down, tail low, ears perked. Jack grabbed his flashlight and scanned the whitewashed path leading into the park. They walked in silence. The beam of light moved across snow-covered benches, iced over trash bins, skeletal trees. The cold was absolute. No birds, no footprints, nothing. Until Rocky stopped. It wasn't dramatic, no bark, no lunge. Just a sudden stillness, head-tilted breath visible in the lamplight. Then he took one slow step forward, nose raised, body tense. Jack followed his gaze. There, under a flickering lamp, sat a tiny figure on a wooden bench half buried in snow. Jack's steps slowed as he approached. The child couldn't have been more than 5. Her coat was oversized and thin, a dull purple that had faded beneath the frost. Her head was bowed, face barely visible beneath tangled dark hair. In her arms, she clutched something, a stuffed animal maybe, or a bundle of fabric pressed to her chest, with the kind of desperate grip that spoke more than words ever could. She wasn't moving. Jack's heart thudded. He crouched down slowly, letting his flashlight drop to the snow. The soft beam lit her face, a pale oval, with lips slightly parted, lashes crusted in white. Her small shoulders trembled faintly, but she made no sound. Rocky moved in, pressing his body gently against the base of the bench, his warmth steady. Silent. The girl didn't react. "Hey!" Jack's voice was a whisper. "Can you hear me?" She didn't look up. He reached out, gloved fingers hovering just over her arm. Her skin felt like ice through the fabric. Her stuffed animal, a bear perhaps, was missing an eye and soaked through with snow. Still no response. Jack slowly unzipped his coat, pulling the emergency blanket from his back pouch and wrapping it around her, careful not to startle. Her head leaned gently against his hand, the only sign she hadn't completely shut down. He looked at Rocky. The dog said nothing, only shifted closer. Then Jack did something he hadn't done in a long time. He closed his eyes and said softly, "Don't let go. We're here now." The wind howled behind them, and the snow kept falling. But something had changed. They had found her. Meanwhile, under harsh hospital lighting and the hum of monitors, Claire Bennett closed a patient chart and sighed. The ER was quiet for now, but something about the night didn't sit right. She adjusted her coat and turned toward the nurse's station just as a call came in. Female mid-30s unconscious. Vehicle crash near Route 5. No ID. But paramedics found a child's jacket in the back seat. Claire's pen paused mid-air. Any sign of the kid? Negative. She stared out the window, where snow pressed thick against the glass. Somewhere out there, a child might be alone. She didn't know that her brother was already kneeling in front of her. Not yet. The storm wasn't letting up. Snow curled around the lamppost like smoke, and the girl on the bench hadn't moved. Not a stir, not even a twitch in her fingers. But she was breathing. Jack had seen that much, barely perceptible, like frost melting from the inside of glass. His flashlight lay forgotten in the snow at his feet, its beam catching slivers of ice in the air like drifting ash. Jack crouched beside the bench, his breath hitching as he studied her more closely. The child wasn't just cold, she was nearly translucent. Her lips were tinged purple, and her fingers, those tiny stiff fingers clutching the bear, had lost their color completely. The bear. He hadn't noticed it properly before. It was soaked and grimy, a button eye hanging by a thread. A crude heart had been drawn in black marker over its chest, faded and smudged, but unmistakably shaped by a child's hand. Jack reached for it, then stopped. Her grip was too tight. It was a lifeline, a boundary, a last piece of something no one could take. Behind him, Rocky stood watch snow clinging to the fur along his legs. The German shepherd's ears twitched every time the wind shifted, but his eyes stayed locked on the girl. She was alive, and to Rocky that meant she was his now. His to protect. Jack exhaled slowly, fog spilling from his lips. She's not going to last much longer. He knew the signs, he'd seen it before in search and rescue cases. Children went quiet before they went unconscious. The brain began retreating from the cold before the body did. He rose to his feet, quickly surveying their surroundings. The park was deserted, blanketed in white. No movement. No approaching headlights. Not even the sound of snow tires on the main road. The whole town was asleep, or had chosen to look away. What kind of place leaves a child out here, he wondered again. And who left her? He turned back to the girl and leaned in, speaking gently but firmly. "All right, kiddo. We're getting out of here. You hang tight, just a little longer." He pulled off one glove and reached into his jacket, retrieving the small fleece wrap he kept in the driver's side door. It was meant for emergencies, injured pets, frostbite victims, the unexpected. He hadn't used it since the mountain hiker rescue last year, but tonight it belonged to her. She didn't resist when he slipped it around her back and under her knees, cradling her as gently as if she were made of spun sugar. Her head lolled slightly, resting against his shoulder. The bear stayed between them, still pressed to her chest. He turned to Rocky. Back to the car. They moved fast. Rocky led the way, navigating the path back through the trees, past the frozen playground, across the snow-choked sidewalk. Jack held the girl close, shielding her from the wind with his coat. Her body was weightless in a way that made his chest ache, like she had already begun to slip away from the world. But she hadn't. Not yet. He wasn't going to let her. Elsewhere, under the fluorescent hum of the ER hallway, Sarah Ellis stirred for the first time. She lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical monitors and clipped sentences. Her hair, a tangled mess of golden brown, was damp with melted snow, and her cheek was streaked with blood from a shallow cut along her hairline. She was 32 tall but narrow-boned, her face striking but worn, as if stress had etched itself there over time. Her hands were long-fingered and rough, more used to dishwater and bus stops than any kind of luxury. Sarah had always been the kind of woman who bore the world without complaint. She worked double shifts at a bakery in the west end of town, smiled at strangers, apologized when others bumped into her. But years of single motherhood had whittled her softness into something tougher, still kind, but brittle around the edges. A nurse young with short auburn hair and a nervous glance approached the bedside. "Miss Ellis, can you hear me?" Sarah's eyes fluttered open. She blinked against the light, confused. "You were in a car accident," the nurse continued gently. "You're at St. Adelaide's. You skidded off the road near Ridge Park." Sarah's breath caught. "My daughter," she rasped. "Emily, where's Emily?" The nurse froze for a second too long. Sarah's voice broke. "She was with me. We were trying to get home. I told her to stay buckled. I swerved to miss the light pole, and I think I blacked out." "I'll get the doctor," the nurse said, already stepping back. But Sarah's voice was rising. "Is she here? Did they bring her? Please, my baby. She's 5. Her name's Emily. She has a bear named Buttons. Did someone find her?" Down the hallway, Claire Bennett heard the voice crack and stood from her desk. She didn't need the nurse to explain. She moved toward the room. Jack placed the girl in the back seat of the cruiser, turned the heat to full, and wrapped her in everything he could find: his spare scarf, the seat blanket, even his own winter gloves. Rocky climbed in beside her, without needing to be asked, laying along the floor of the back seat, his flank brushing against her boots. Jack stood outside for a beat longer than he should have, staring through the window, watching her chest rise and fall in slow, barely there rhythm. He hadn't said Lily's name aloud in months, but he heard it now, whispered in the back of his mind. He closed the door. Then he turned toward the front seat and climbed in. The engine grumbled to life. The storm outside roared louder like a final warning, but they were done waiting. He shifted into drive. The windshield wipers worked in rhythmic struggle, squealing every few seconds as they scraped layers of wet snow from the glass. Outside, the storm was no longer a background. It was a presence. It clawed at the cruiser, shoved against its frame, flung ice like handfuls of glass. But inside the vehicle, everything felt suspended, held in the hush between breath and heartbeat. Jack Carter drove slower than he liked, not out of caution, but reverence. In the rearview mirror, he could just make out her, the girl Emily. She was still tucked under the fleece wrap, and his scarf still cradling that one-eyed stuffed bear like it was the only real thing left in the world. Her body barely moved. Only the faintest shift of her chest betrayed life. A breath. A thread. He didn't speak. Not for a while. Silence had always been easier than trying to shape grief into sentences. Words had failed him 5 years ago. Why should they serve him now? He thought of the note. It had been in her coat pocket, creased soft with age, the ink fading slightly. Emily Ellis, 555-208-9032. No address, no next of kin, no school name, just a name and a number, half a life, scribbled on government paper. The dashboard console offered no signal. The cellular towers along this side of town were either iced over or down entirely. He stared at the number again, whispering it under his breath until it became rhythm, like the old habit of reciting badge numbers before testifying in court. He didn't know who had written the heart on the back. A child's drawing. A parent's. There was something impossibly fragile about that pink ink heart, almost desperate. Jack folded the paper again and slid it into the small pocket of his vest, close to his chest. Behind him, Rocky stirred. The dog's body was still curled tight along the floor of the backseat flank, pressed to Emily's boots. His ears twitched, eyes alert, as if tracking something only he could sense. Rocky wasn't just trained to sniff danger. He was trained to feel shifts in people, their fear, their sadness, their hope. And tonight something in him had locked onto the girl like a compass on true north. "Stay with her," Jack murmured. Rocky didn't need to be told. The streets blurred past houses with chimney smoke barely visible, street signs crusted in ice, the occasional flicker of porch light through thick curtains. Jack recognized this part of town. It was the same route he had driven 5 years ago, the night his daughter vanished. It had snowed that night, too. Not like this was a full-scale storm, but enough Enough to cover tracks, enough to bury answers. He remembered the call coming and missing child, 5 years old, last seen behind the house, wearing a red coat. He had dropped his coffee. Claire had called 4 times before he picked up. Her voice had cracked. He hadn't heard her sound like that since they were kids. She had been watching Lily that weekend. Jack had taken the shift because no one else would, because he thought it would be just another night, because he trusted that Claire, his steady, precise, capable older sister, could handle a child for 48 hours. But Lily had gone out the back door, into the woods, into the white. Jack blinked hard, forcing the memory down. His jaw clenched. There was no time for ghosts. This girl, Emily, was not his daughter. She was here, now, and she was still breathing. The cruiser turned past the old water tower and onto a long, curving hill that dipped toward the southern edge of town. At the base of it, the red and white glow of St. Adelaide's Hospital broke through the flurries like a lighthouse. The emergency entrance sat just past the ambulance bay, fluorescent lights overhead, awning streaked with icicles, still a few minutes away. He glanced in the mirror again. Her eyes were closed, lips parted slightly. No sound. Jack reached back without thinking and adjusted the blanket. His fingertips brushed her cheek, still cold, but not icy. "I've got you," he said. He didn't know if she could hear him. Maybe she could. Maybe it didn't matter. A low whine came from Rocky. Not panic, not urgency, just a sound of presence. Jack exhaled. What kind of town lets a child disappear in a storm? He thought again. What kind of man keeps seeing his own child in the face of every girl he tries to save? He didn't have answers. He hadn't had them in years. But he drove. Snow tore sideways across the windshield, and the cruiser's heater groaned louder. Jack turned the defroster to max and pressed his palm to the steering wheel, just to feel something. He thought again of Claire, of their last conversation, of how after the search failed she'd tried to say sorry, but he hadn't wanted apologies. He'd wanted answers. He'd wanted someone to blame. And Claire had been there holding Lily's jacket, eyes rimmed with tears, whispering, "I just turned around for a second." A second. A second had cost him everything. And now, 5 years later, fate had delivered him another child in another storm. Was that mercy? Was it punishment? He didn't know. But he would not let this one slip through his fingers. The hospital drew closer. Jack turned into the narrow lane that curved beneath the emergency awning. The tires crunched snow headlights bouncing off salt-stained pavement. A paramedic wheeled a gurney back inside, through automatic doors that hissed open with the sound of breath. Jack didn't get out. Not yet. He looked at the girl in the mirror. He looked at the bear. The silence in the cruiser was deep and warm and trembling. And then finally, he turned the engine off. The emergency room doors slid open with a sigh, exhaling warm, sterilized air into the storm-rattled night. Jack stepped into the fluorescent light, the weight of Emily in his arms grounding him like an anchor. She was still as a whisper, her head cradled against his shoulder, fingers clutching the matted bear. Rocky padded silently at his side, fur-damp eyes, alert tail, low but steady. The hospital foyer buzzed with low voices, the hum of machines, and the distant shuffle of rubber soles on tile. A nurse at the front desk looked up. She was young, 20-something, with soft features and dark curly hair pulled back in a bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of the child and the snow-drenched officer. Code pediatric. Jack said, voice hoarse, 5-year-old, found in Northridge Park, hypothermic, still breathing. The nurse stood abruptly, radioing a trauma alert as she reached for gloves. Triage room 2. This way, officer. But before she could move, a door opened down the hall, and a familiar voice called out a voice Jack hadn't heard in 5 years. Where's the child? Claire Carter strode down the corridor. Her navy blue scrubs pressed her ID badge clipped to her chest, and her long brown hair tied back with clinical precision. She was tall, with an upright posture that came from decades of holding things together for patients, for colleagues, for a family that had long since cracked down the middle. The only thing betraying her were the faint shadows beneath her hazel eyes. Shadows that hadn't been there the last time Jack saw her. She froze mid-stride. Jack froze too. For a beat, the hallway silenced. Not just from the surprise of seeing each other, but from the weight of all the words they hadn't said. Claire, he said, as if the name alone carried meaning enough. Her eyes moved from him to the girl in his arms and widened. She stepped forward instinctively, the nurse trailing behind her, now forgotten. Triage room 2! Now! They moved in unison, no more words exchanged. Claire guided him down the hall, her voice brisk but not cold. Jack followed, focusing on the rise and fall of the small body in his arms. Inside the triage room, 2 additional nurses prepped the bed. One, an older man with tired shoulders and a gentle voice, took Rocky by the leash and guided him to a corner with a blanket. Rocky resisted for a moment, but obeyed. Jack laid Emily down on the padded bed as Claire began examining her. Vitals low, pupils responsive, fingers still clenching, her tone dropped. That's good. She's fighting. Jack hovered nearby, arms crossed tightly across his chest. He said nothing. He hadn't said anything about Lily either, all those years ago. Not really. Claire didn't ask him why he hadn't called. She didn't tell him she'd missed him. She just worked. Minutes passed like hours. Then Claire glanced at the girl's jacket, now drying on a side chair. She pulled a laminated card from the inner pocket, her brows furrowed. "Emily Ellis," she murmured. Jack nodded. "Found that in her coat. No signal on the number." She was alone. Claire looked up sharply. "Ellis." She turned open the cabinet drawer and retrieved a patient file. "We admitted a woman, Sarah Ellis, less than an hour ago. Car crash on the West Loop. She was driving alone, said she was looking for her daughter." Jack's mouth opened slightly. She mentioned the name. She kept repeating Emily before she passed out. Claire's face darkened. She turned back to the little girl. "That's her mother." "Has to be." Jack leaned closer. "She's stable." Claire hesitated. Broken ribs, mild concussion, possible internal bleeding. She's sedated now, but alive. Another pause. She risked driving in the storm, looking for her daughter. Claire nodded slowly, and suddenly Jack felt it again, that same awful twist in his stomach, the one that had followed him since Lily vanished. That feeling of what if, of too late, of every parent's silent nightmare. "Where is she?" he asked. "She's an observation." But unconscious Claire replied. Then softer. "She asked me not to take the bear from her when we undressed her. She kept whispering, 'Buttons will keep me safe.'" Jack looked over at the ragged stuffed bear resting near Emily's side, its fur damp and worn, but still tucked against her neck. His throat tightened. "She reminds me of Lily," he said before he could stop himself. Claire's hands paused for the first time. "I know." They stood in silence for a while, the low beeping of the monitor, a metronome between them. Outside, the storm howled like a creature trying to get in. But in this narrow room, warmed by steady lights and the presence of 2 people who had once shared blood and brokenness, there was stillness. Jack finally stepped back. "You'll let me know when she wakes." Claire nodded. "You're not going home?" "No," he said. "Not tonight." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Claire?" She met his eyes. "I'm glad it was you. That it was you who found her." Claire didn't smile, but her eyes softened just slightly. "Me too." He stepped out into the corridor, Rocky rising to join him. The shepherd leaned briefly against his leg, silent, steady, present. Jack looked down the hallway where the nurse's station glowed in sterile light and the windows still shivered with frost. This town? What kind of place was it that it could take so much from people, yet still return fragments like this? What kind of gray-stitched lives back together with snow and silence he didn't know. But tonight, at least someone had found someone, and for now, that was enough. The room was quiet, too quiet for a hospital, even in the early morning hours. Outside the window, the storm had begun to die, leaving the world blanketed in a heavy, undisturbed snow. It clung to the windowsill like a breath held too long. In room 213, the heater purred a soft, persistent hum that wrapped itself around the silence like a lullaby, refusing to end. Rocky lay curled beside the hospital bed, his fur still slightly damp from the night's storm, though someone had dried most of it with a towel. His nose twitched as he dozed, ears flicking now and then, ever alert beneath the stillness. One paw extended just enough to brush the side of the hospital gurney, as if even in sleep he insisted on touching her. This little girl who had somehow chosen him. Emily lay under a thin, heated blanket, her cheeks regaining color inch by inch. Her tiny fingers, pale and bird-like, were still wrapped around the scraggly stuffed bear. Her breath came slower, now deeper. For For the first time since being found, her face had softened, no longer drawn tight in fear or cold, but something gentler, trusting. And then slowly her eyes opened. She didn't blink, just looked. The ceiling, then the overhead light, then the side wall, and then Rocky. A whisper so soft it was almost lost in the hum of machines. "Where's the dog?" Rocky stirred instantly as if he'd heard her soul rather than her voice. He stood stretched with a soft groan and placed his front paws gently on the edge of her bed. His eyes met hers, and Emily's face changed, not startled, not confused, but brightened just slightly like a lamp flickering back to life. "There you are," she breathed, reaching a trembling hand toward his muzzle. He lowered his head until her fingers could press gently to the fur between his eyes. "You're warmer than the blanket." She smiled, then a small drowsy curl of her lips, but it was enough. Jack had been standing in the doorway for a while, unnoticed. He hadn't meant to linger, he'd simply come to check. But when he saw her eyelids flutter and that voice so small, so certain, ask about the dog before anything else, something in him cracked. And when she touched Rocky's head with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for miracles, Jack looked away. He cleared his throat quietly. Claire appeared beside him a moment later, holding a tablet and her usual guarded expression. Her hair was tied back as always, her steps precise, professional. But when she reached the threshold and saw the scene inside, Rocky gently pressing his weight into the child's hand, and Emily whispering secrets only dogs understand, she stopped. She asked for the dog first. Jack said, his voice barely more than air. Claire nodded. "She doesn't even know where she is," he added, but she remembered him. Claire looked at Jack for a long time, and then wordlessly reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a light touch, hesitant but steady. Jack didn't move. Her hand remained there not as a balm or apology, but something more ancient recognition. Jack kept his eyes on the child, but his throat tightened. "She looks like Lily," he whispered. Claire's fingers tensed slightly. "She does." Neither of them mentioned how Lily had never woken up. Inside the room, Emily was now telling Rocky something about Buttons the bear and how they'd gotten lost together. Rocky, for his part, sat upright like a statue with a warm heartbeat, ears, tilted tail, slow swaying against the hospital floor. "Does this town ever stop breaking people?" Jack asked suddenly. Claire blinked at him. "I mean, every street's got some story like this. Missing girls, drunk drivers, lost dogs that somehow become heroes. This town eats people, Claire, then spits them out with frostbite." Claire didn't answer immediately. She watched Emily run her fingers along Rocky's collar. "You ever think maybe it also saves them?" she said softly. "Maybe not all at once, maybe not cleanly. But sometimes." Jack sighed. "You still believe that?" he asked. "I never stopped." Silence returned, heavy, but not suffocating. Claire turned, checked her tablet, then gave a small nod. "Her vitals are stabilizing. I'll contact Child Services soon and see if they can reach the number from the note. Still no update from her mom." "Let me know when Sarah wakes up," Jack said. "She's stable but sleeping," Claire replied. "She'll be moved out of ICU later tonight." "She's lucky," he said. "They both are." Claire tilted her head. "So are we." He almost smiled. Inside the room, Emily's eyelids drooped again. Her hand slipped from Rocky's snout and fell gently over Button's worn fur. Her last words before sleep reclaimed her were a murmur. "He's mine now. Okay, he found me." Jack stepped back from the doorway. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know what he'd tell the department or why he suddenly cared so much about one child who didn't belong to him. But maybe. Maybe belonging wasn't about bloodlines. Maybe it was about who showed up in the cold when no one else did. Rocky emerged from the room a minute later, as if sensing something had shifted. He padded to Jack's side and sat shoulders square, gaze forward. Jack looked down at him. "You warm enough, buddy?" Rocky blinked. Jack rubbed the top of his head. "Yeah, me too." Down the hallway, the nurse's station glowed in soft white. A janitor passed by with a mop, whistling under his breath, and outside, the sky had started to lighten the faintest suggestion of dawn, slicing the storm clouds open. In this town, where snow buried memories and silence stitched old wounds, a little girl had found warmth in a dog's heartbeat. And Jack just maybe had found something like hope in hers. Morning in the hospital came without fanfare. No sunlight burst through the windows, just a soft gray haze beyond the frosted glass that marked the lingering breath of the storm. But inside room 217, warmth pulsed through the air, not from machines or blankets, but from something quieter, harder to define. A kind of quiet reunion with hope. Emily sat propped up in bed, a tray of untouched oatmeal in front of her. Buttons the teddy bear nestled under her arm like a lifelong companion. She looked better now, still pale, but color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes sparkled with something close to peace. Rocky lay curled at the foot of her bed, occasionally lifting his head whenever a nurse walked by, but always returning his gaze to Emily. The way he watched her wasn't just protective, it was purposeful, like he'd chosen her. Jack stood quietly near the doorway again, coffee in hand, his uniform jacket slung over one arm. He hadn't left the hospital. He'd dozed briefly in the waiting lounge, then came back before dawn, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the child, or perhaps it was the memory of another girl from another storm. Maybe it was Rocky. Claire arrived not long after, clipboard in hand, a softness in her step she hadn't shown in years. Her voice was quieter around Emily, less clinical, more maternal, though she'd never had children of her own. "She's stable," Claire said to Jack after checking the monitors. "Mild dehydration, but no frostbite, no permanent damage. She's lucky." Jack nodded slowly. "So's her mom." At that moment, a nurse peeked into the room, a petite woman in her early 30s with kind brown eyes and short, springy curls tucked under a cap. "Officer Carter?" She said, "Sarah Ellis is awake. She's asking for Emily." Jack looked to Claire, who gave a small, tense nod. Room 218 was just across the hall. Jack stepped in, first Rocky, trailing behind him, with soft paws on linoleum. Claire followed quietly, hands clasped behind her back. Sarah Ellis lay propped on a hospital bed, I-4 in her arm, bruises on her temple, and collarbone bandages around her ribs. She was tall, though, slightly hunched with pain, and there was something gaunt about her face. Cheekbones, too. Sharp lips, chapped and pale, but her eyes, those wide, fiercely maternal eyes, lit up the second she saw Jack. "You," her voice cracked. "The officer and the dog. You found her, didn't you?" Jack didn't reply right away. He studied her for a moment. "Yes," he finally said. "Rocky led me to her. She closed her eyes, tears slipping free. I tried to find her," Sarah whispered as if confessing a failure that clawed at her ribs. "We were staying in that shelter near North Ridge. I turned my back for a minute, and she wandered out. When I noticed, I ran, just grabbed the keys and drove. I didn't even think. Her voice broke entirely. Claire moved forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's okay," Claire said. "You'll see her soon." Sarah nodded quickly as if afraid to believe it. She had the bear. "Yes," Jack answered. Buttons never left her side. Sarah laughed softly through her tears, brushing at her face with a trembling hand. "Of course. That bear's been more reliable than me." Jack stepped closer. "You did what you could. You went out into that storm to look for her. That means something." Sarah looked at him, truly looked. "You don't know what I've failed at. You don't know what I've put her through." "No," Jack agreed, "but I know what it's like to carry that guilt. And I know what it looks like when someone chooses not to give up. You didn't give up, Sarah, and neither did she." Rocky let out a low, quiet huff, as if seconding the sentiment. Just then, a nurse entered gently, wheeling in a small figure wrapped in flannel and warmth. "Emily?" The moment their eyes met, there were no more words. Mommy Emily slipped from the chair before anyone could stop her, stumbling forward into Sarah's waiting arms. The reunion was messy and wet, with tears full of little gasps and half-finished apologies. Sarah held her tightly, cradling her head, as if to anchor them both in this unlikely present. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered over and over. I'm here now." Emily only nodded into her chest fingers, still gripping the bear in one hand and Rocky's collar in the other. Jack stepped back. Claire did too. "You want to give them a minute?" Claire asked gently. Jack nodded. "Yeah." They walked slowly down the corridor together. Jack tucked his hands into his pockets. Claire looked straight ahead. "She's a good kid," Claire said finally. "Bright, resilient." "She reminds me of someone," Jack replied. Claire didn't press, but he could feel the weight of her memory beside his. Do you think Jack said, after a long silence, that we ever stop trying to make up for the past? Claire stopped walking, turned to him. No, she said honestly. But I think sometimes we get moments that let us start again. Jack let that sink in. He looked at her then, fully for the first time in years. Her face had lines now faint, but deeper than he remembered. But her eyes, they hadn't changed. Strong, tired, searching. I'm sorry I didn't come to you that night, he said. I'm sorry I shut you out, she replied. It wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. Behind them, a child laughed. It was small and full of warmth, like the first note of a forgotten song. They turned, and down the hallway Emily was holding Rocky's ears and whispering again. Sarah looked on, arms wrapped around her legs, smiling through the bruises. Outside, snow was beginning to melt. It had been a week since the storm. The snow in town had begun to recede, turning into slush along the sidewalks and damp footprints in front of shop doors. But in the hearts of a few people, something had begun to settle, something quieter than snowfall, but no less powerful peace. Jack Carter sat at his small kitchen table, the morning light soft across the wooden floorboards, steam rising from a chipped navy blue mug. He had traded his patrol uniform for a worn flannel shirt and jeans, though the lines on his face were still those of a man who'd seen too many winters in people's eyes. Rocky lay at his feet, his head resting on Jack's boot, eyes half-lidded tail, giving the occasional thump against the floor. There was a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find Sarah and Emily standing in the winter sun. Sarah had filled out a little, the color returning to her cheeks, her long brown hair now brushed and tied back loosely. She still wore thrifted clothes, a plain tan coat, worn boots, but she held herself taller, as if being seen again by her daughter had given her spine back its strength. Emily stood beside her, bundled in a bright pink jacket and a rainbow beanie too big for her head. In one hand, she held Buttons the ever-faithful bear, and in the other, something behind her back. "Hi, Mr. Jack," Emily said, grinning. "I brought you something." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh!" She produced it like a magician, a sheet of white paper, slightly crumpled from the journey in her glove. On it, drawn with colorful markers, was a simple scene, a stick-figure man in a badge holding a flashlight, a big floppy-eared dog by his side, and a small girl with a teddy bear in one arm. Above them, snowflakes fell in crooked shapes, and the words in crayon read, "My Hero, Officer Jack and Rocky." Jack took the drawing, his fingers suddenly clumsy. "You remembered the flashlight," he said softly. "I liked that part," Emily said. "It made the snow glow." Sarah smiled from beside her daughter. "She wanted you to have it, said it was important you knew." Jack looked down at the drawing again, then crouched and met Emily's eyes. "You're the real hero," he said. "You held on. That takes more courage than people think." She giggled. "Rocky says I'm brave." Rocky, as if on cue, patted over and nuzzled her mittened hand. Emily dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck. Sarah glanced at Jack. "We're moving into temporary housing down near West Hill. The shelter helped us find a place. It's not much, but it's something." Jack nodded. "That's good," she hesitated. "I was thinking, if you're not busy sometime, Emily would love to visit Rocky. He's all she talks about." "I'd like that," Jack said. So would he. They stood in the doorway a moment longer, the air around them still crisp, but no longer biting. After Sarah and Emily left, Jack sat back at the table. He pinned the drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a moose, something Lily had made in kindergarten, and for the first time in years, the kitchen didn't feel so silent. Later that afternoon, Jack and Rocky visited the community center for the first meeting of the town's new trauma support pilot program, a collaboration between the department and the children's clinic. Jack wasn't sure what to expect. He didn't like small talk, and he wasn't much of a group guy. But Rocky was the bridge, and Jack was beginning to understand what it meant to walk across one. In the circle of fold-out chairs, he met other kids: Timmy, age 6 with fire scars on his legs, Grace, 10, who hadn't spoken since the accident, and Mariah, age 8, who refused to take her hoodie off even indoors. Each child had eyes too old for their faces, and yet, when Rocky entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Grace lifted her chin. Mariah reached out, then pulled back, then reached again. Timmy laughed for the first time that day. Jack sat beside them, watching, listening, and occasionally speaking. Not about himself, at least, not yet. But about Rocky, about storms, about flashlights in the snow, and slowly the children began to draw their own stories in crayon and paper, just like Emily. Claire visited the center twice that week. She didn't stay long, her hospital shifts were demanding, but she always left something behind: medical kits, snacks, a smile. One afternoon, she caught Jack packing up, and he looked up surprised. "You came back," he said. "I always come back," she replied. Eventually, they stood in the empty room a moment. "Is this where you'll stay?" she asked him. Jack looked around the walls, the drawings, the table full of juice boxes. "I think this is where I start," he said. The question lingered. Was this town just a graveyard of lost dreams? Or was it something else, a place where healing quietly found its way back into frozen hearts? That night, as the town lights dimmed, Jack sat on his porch, Rocky at his side, and a single drawing pinned above the doorframe. A child, a bear, a man, and a dog beneath a snowfall that no longer looked like the end of the world. And somewhere in the distance, another child's laughter drifted down the street, like wind through the trees. Sometimes the smallest souls lead us back to what we've lost: faith, love, and the warmth we thought was gone forever. A 5-year-old girl with a teddy bear, a dog with a silent vow, and a man who thought he'd forgotten how to feel. But in a town buried in snow, they found each other, and in doing so reminded us all that no heart is ever too broken for healing. It wasn't just luck that brought Rocky to that bench. It wasn't just chance that Jack was on patrol that night. Sometimes what we call coincidence is really God working quietly behind the scenes. Sometimes a miracle looks like a flashlight in the dark, or a warm nose pressed against a frozen hand. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt lost, tired, or forgotten, know this: you are never alone. Healing is possible. Hope is alive. And God still sends angels sometimes with pause. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs light today. Comment "Amen" if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more stories of hope, courage, and redemption. And may God bless every single person who watches this, no matter where you are.